So this is the third in a series of videos on ferrules. In video number 1, we looked at why you would use a ferrule. In video number 2, we attempted to look at the colour codes on the shoulders of ferrules in order to identify the conductors that can be inserted within them. In this video, we're going to look at tips and types. However, if you haven't seen videos number 1 and 2, check the description below or the link above Gordon's head. Come on in, Gordon, give me a top tip or a type that we're going to start with.
Well, we'll start with a type people will be familiar with, whether they think it or not, and that's on the end of RCBOs.
Okay,
For most manufacturers, you will find an uninsulated ferrule. Now, there's a, if you ever need to shorten that, there's nothing to stop you, chopping that lead and putting a correctly sized ferrule on the end of there to get back to that same level of integrity that came with the device in the first place.
And I'd say when you're looking at RCCBs and you've got the fly lead at the bottom of the RCCB going to the neutral bar, often that hasn't got a ferrule on it. And I know when you take those out that they start spraying around and then you've got one or two of them not quite getting in, you're trying to twist them obviously to get them in. Again, that would be a great place to use an uninsulated ferrule.
Yeah.
When else would I use an uninsulated ferrule?
I mean, a ferrule either way is in a plug.
Okay,
So a lot of, if you ever buy in a product and open up the plug, you'll tend to find a lot of the ones that have been sort of mass produced will already have a ferrule on there.
Yeah.
Nothing to stop you doing that yourself when you fit in the plug, and again, it just makes life a lot easier.
Okay, yeah. So I like that. They come, these uninsulated ones, they come in a standard tip length.
So there's lots of lengths. All ferrules, yeah, there's different lengths, different sizes. Obviously sizes to match the conductor size, but then different lengths for different applications. So certain times you might need a longer ferrule. Okay.
Now they're uninsulated. I've got a tin of them.
Yeah.
Okay. And the tin itself will probably identify on the lid what size is underneath.
Yeah.
What happens if I drop that tin on the floor?
If you drop that tin on the floor, you've got a big challenge telling them really. And it's sweep them up, put them in the bin. But it's a lot of the time you're working. Example, I've got an uninsulated one. They've got a tiny flute on the end to help you get the cable in, but it is like it is like threading the eye of a needle. What
size cable is that you're using?
This is a 0.75.
Okay.
And that's hopefully a 0.75 ferrule, although it does feel quite loose. We'll hopefully, fingers crossed.
We'll find out in a minute. Okay.
Crank that up. Yeah, so that was the right size ferrule there.
Okay.
So that's...
So how would you have known that was the right size ferrule if you'd have found it on the bench itself?
Well, normally if it's the other way, if you can't get the cable in, you've got the wrong size, sometimes you'll crimp it up and you'll just be able to pull it straight off.
So there's nothing on them to identify the actual size for conductors?
No.
All right, so that makes the shouldered variety slightly a bigger advantage because at least you've got a bit of a clue. Unfortunately, as you saw in video number 2, that there is obviously 3 systems to unpick the size of the cables itself.
Yeah.
Any other top tips for us on the uninsulated type?
So the uninsulated, I mean, the best way to think of ferrules is it's a way of transforming a stranded or fine stranded cable into a solid conductor, really. Okay. So in the past, you might have soldered it.
Yeah,
and that gets you around doing that really. So, yeah, that's the main point where you'd use them. So they're very good where there's restricted space, but obviously for most applications, we'd probably be thinking you'd be using the ones with an insulated shoulder.
Okay, so I can see on the desk there you've also got a Wago 221, and I know when we chuck this out on Instagram, and feel free to follow us on Instagram, that this kicked up quite a stir.
Yeah, because what we did was we basically crimped 2 single conductors into one ferrule and put them inside the 221.
Right, okay.
And this was a tip we had sent. It was from quite a few electricians who recommend that as an approach. We ran that past Wago.
Yeah.
So they said, yes, you can do that. Obviously, it is best practice to have 1 conductor per way. Okay. Of course, they would say that because they sell more terminals that way. But essentially, what you've done with a ferrule is turn 2 conductors into 1 solid conductor, and there's absolutely no way that's coming off there.
So if I had 2.75 mil fine stranded or stranded conductors and put them into a 1.5 ferrule, and crimp it up, it would go into obviously the Wago 221 then.
Yeah, that's what we've done there.
Okay.
And you can see that goes in there nicely, clamps down, yeah, and both the outer insulation's well within that terminal block.
Just to clarify, you do not need to ferrule up connections that go into Wago 221s. They do take stranded, fine stranded, etc. conductors into them, as well as solid. But that's a good way, a good top tip to get 2 conductors in if you needed to. However, if you knew the circuit might be prone to maintenance or testing, that's probably not going to help you out in that stage, is it?
No, because who knows, the next person in might not have a ferrule crimper, and they'll have to separate them, and then
you've only got one terminal.
That's it.
Yeah, okay. Any other applications that you can show us as are the top tips?
Top tips. I mean, if we moved on to the insulated ones.
Yeah.
So you touched on pin lengths.
Yes.
So here's a typical example. See, now we're connecting more and more electronics in installations, and a lot of them. So here's an example: Nest heatlink. So great design, looks fantastic.
Yeah.
PCB mounted terminals, but they're quite a way back in the housing here.
Okay.
So if you're trying to imagine you're fitting this on site, it's up against the wall, you're trying to get a stranded conductor into that terminal that's quite a way back. A ferrule's a great way of doing that. You basically again, it's a solid conductor, it's easier to get into the terminal. So
So if those terminals were quite a way back, you obviously can get a longer pin on them, whether they be uninsulated or shoulder identified insulated. You can obviously, if it's too long though, the pin, could you just trim it back?
You can trim it back, but I mean, here's an example here. So there's a long pin and a shorter pin.
Are they the same conductor size? Because you've got a white one and a blue one.
Well, they're different, as you'll know. You look, check your colour chart. There's clearly we've got a French-German combination here. Okay. But again, along the long pin, you can see that's too long, still hanging out. But the shorter pin, goes in there fantastically. That'll fit in there fantastically.
You talked about uninsulated ones using a double. Is there any way that we can show an advantage of using, say, the shoulder identified insulated ones as doubles? Yeah.
So again, here's an example I've prepped up here. So here's 2 1mm into a double red. So double red, we're French, you can...
Oh yeah, so you got, so let's get it right. So that was a double red, so it came already allowing for the fact that it's got 2 1mm in. So effectively that's a 2mm on the end.
It's a 2mm barrel, that barrel will take that, but it's got a specially widened shoulder to take the insulation into there as well. So you're not going to see any exposed copper in there. Okay. And that's good for, so again, back to our Nest heatlink. You've got to obviously feed it with a line connection. I'll put that in there.
And again, when that's fine stranded, 2 of them going into those electronic style terminations, that can be tricky.
Yeah, and then obviously, so I've done that with a twin, and then again put it into a single, which I'm then using to feed the relay, which again will probably need a line connection as well. And that's it. That is a great solution for anyone fitting Nest heatlink products.
I found when I was extending the CT connection on an EV charging point that when I made those connections, again, those electronic based connections, I found that quite difficult because obviously I'd extended the cable, so I've now not got a ferruled end. Okay, I found that quite difficult. So can you demonstrate how much better it would be on that type of cable?
We've got a data cable, so very fine stranded, so we know that the ferrule sizes go down to 0.14, so incredibly small. So I'll try if I can even find it on the bench.
Wow!
So there's a tiny one here. I'm going to use this VR crimper here because the good thing about this crimper is it has this guide plate. Yeah. Massive range from 0.08 to 16 mil. But what you can do is just hold your ferrule in place.
It in there. Oh, that's got to be. Well, you got a chance now, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, I've got a chance while I put that in there. It's easier to thread because it's not my fingers holding that tiny crimp. And I've got it and done.
And that CT that I connected, that would have made a lot better electrical connection going in with a ferruled end.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, so I've done that on the uninsulated. Insulated is a lot easier. You got the shoulder that just grabs the wires and
that's gone on.
Zips into place.
Just drop it in, crimp it up.
Yeah.
It's clearly demonstrated, that we should have this in electrician's toolkit. The amount of times it's going to get us out of jail, and it's going to save electricians time.
Yeah. So in the last part of the series, we're going to look at some different crimp tools, and see how you choose a crimp tool depending on what you're working on.